that they end up just not saying things. Like polarizing, moments always taken out of context because you don't know what those people know, right? So this isn't like to put down Antifa or something like that. It's just to say that if you don't know what's going on, it looks scary, right? And especially the way it gets framed. The way it gets framed by the anti-PC industry, which it's great that we have a word for that now. That's what that is. It's where you can retire from your university position because you said something edgy, it got some people to yell at you, and now everybody who doesn't want to have to go to college has you saying, yeah, you don't need to. I've been there, it's a shit show, and it's a sinking ship, and they're just overrun by these relativists. They don't even know what truth is. Here, check it out. Just go to trade school and listen to my channel, and you'll be fine. You'll be smarter than they are, and you won't even have to do anything. So I think that there's the tone is we're trying to be respectful, mature. With that said, we can still have some fun. Speak for everybody. There will be a couple people in their breakout sessions, especially probably. I don't think this will be so much from like the keynotes, but probably in breakout sessions, some people will just be like, "Well, fuck Peterson," and that's allowed. You're allowed to do that, but that's not NSP. And that's not Boise DSA, and that's not the School of Public Service, and that's not the Philosophy Department, and that's not the Sociology Department. That was me just making all of our, those are our sponsors' statement. So it's not them saying that. This is not a takedown. Well, fine, go for it. If anyone was watching our pregame sessions, Lamp kind of had that attitude. Lamp was like, he's not here right now, but he will be later. But Lamp was like, Dave wants to do this, mature thing, but I don't really have to. And I was like thinking about it, I was like, fair enough. I'm not gonna tell you that you have to either, right? You get to do what you want. So we're all adults here, but let's also just remember, everything you say can and will be used against you by the court of culture that likes to take things out of context online and make it look stupid. So that's undoubtedly already gonna happen to a lot of us, right? YouTube, Facebook, everything you say is gonna be taken out of context. And as long as we're okay with that, as long as you know that, and as long as you know that what you say can end up on anybody's channel, and that this room itself is just vulnerable in that sense, then it's going to change how the conversation ensues. And that when I was a part of the Pittsburgh Continental Networks conference in Pittsburgh at Duquesne University a few years ago, and that's where I met Marilyn Lawrence here. They had the Parts to Examine Life people, that podcast, do a live panel, and I've been to a lot of conferences, and that was the first time that we saw this deliberate attempt to bridge the academic conference with the world. And that was really exciting to me because I've been to a lot of these conferences where it's transient, right? A handful of us might remember a couple. If you take someone's business card or you take somebody's email, maybe you can follow up with them later, but you can't. I mean, it's going to be pretty difficult just to review what they said there, right? And part of the nice thing about academic publishing and the conference is that there is this sense of, even if only 15 people on average will ever read anything that gets published there is this paper trail. This record has been established. You are held to the things that you've said. Now later, if you say something, people can decide to roll up their sleeves and dig through everything you said. They really want to, and sometimes people really do. Well, now we're making that a thing that people can do online. And I think it's really important, and we talked about this in a few of the pregame sessions, that folks do not, especially leftist comrades, I found, are often a lot more, especially professors, are a lot more hesitant to do things live or even put stuff up at all. And that has nothing to do with how good of a speaker they are, how confident they are, how they feel about the whole thing. That it just has to do with this whole, the vulnerability, right? It's when Peterson does that, he's broken out of a sort of this hierarchy where information is disseminated before it reaches the public, and usually it takes 50 to 100 years to really reach the public. He's taken a line of flight that goes directly to the public, right? And that's what we are doing right now. And that's, to me, really exciting. And so there's been a lot of this, setting up technology and stuff like that. It's new for all of us. that are part of the setup process. This is the first conference any of us have organized. This equipment's all new. A lot of the money that, besides like the fees for all of the other things that are normal for a conference, are going into production for the content. So we're really looking to highlight what y'all put out there. And so this is already like a great turnout for an academic conference in my mind on something like this. But just remember, it's full of thousands, potentially hundreds of thousands of people. It is definitely hundreds of thousands, because that's the coattails we're on. It's really exciting. And so it's nice to put out a lot of information to combat the flood of Stefan Molyneux videos, the flood of Ruben videos. You better read this whole book. You'd be like, I was just with like 25 other people who did, and now you, if you want to say anything back to me, have to go watch everything we put out there. Or you can just use the tag group. Sounds like you wish Jordan Peterson was your daddy, but okay. Either one of those is a totally acceptable sign-off for there's more of an attitude of like, well, Institute. I thought that's really exciting. It's a treat for whoever gets to be here first, right? All here, we get to do this. Feel free to help yourself to fruit, bagels, coffee, tea, etc. And we'll be leading off with this debate here in just a second, but we'll be taking some questions real quick. So yeah, we'll start with Emily.
My question is just, what is the URL for people who want to watch this while here?
Oh, awesome, yeah. So the URL for the people, okay, so talk to the people who are doing a YouTube live stream yet. I don't know, Jamie, how you can share that link.
Yeah, the YouTube one is should do the Facebook one, because the YouTube one isn't like working too good.
Okay, we'll mess around with YouTube, hopefully get YouTube to work better, and we might end up just using like a laptop. That might be easier.
Yeah.
I know that if we were using YouTube live stream on my laptop, for instance, and we'll probably just do that later. Heck, let's do it right now. But that's an easy to share link. I don't know how to do it off of phones, but for the time being, it's live streaming on our NSP page on Facebook. So, what is it? The @ NSP Boise. That's how you'll find us on Facebook, or you can just type in NSP. I'll say a thing about the New Civilization Project before we welcome up our speakers, I guess. That was a good segue. But before I say some things about NSP, should we take, anybody else have any more questions? It'd be good for the order, so we don't have too much chaos.
I just figured I'd quickly ask if you could state why Peterson chose not to attend this conference, and why several other people we invited were not able to attend this conference.
That's a really good question, and actually it goes straight to the heart of this other thing I was going to talk about our majority cishet white male response here, right? So how's that a tie into who's not here, right? Well, because we reached out to a lot of people who are not cis or het or white, and to be honest, we got multiple responses saying it's just not very safe right now to make yourself vulnerable in a situation like this as a marginalized person, because one, there's literal Proud Boys, Aryans, what other kinds of white supremacists in all places, but probably more in Idaho than there are in California, to say the least. But beyond that, like them being here in the flesh, and there's people doxing people online and sending you dead animals in your mailbox and hate mails and rape threats and all of this stuff in your Twitter feeds, and causing people to have to completely change everything about their life and often move. And Kate Mann especially, who was slapped with a lawsuit just for saying some things. She didn't even call Peterson a misogynist, which is what she's being sued for. She said that some of the things he says fit her definition of misogynistic statements, which is not the same as saying you are that. It's saying you say some things that are that. maybe you should think about what you say. But whenever you challenge a powerful cishet white man with the thing that they are saying, they turn it into this attack on their character rather than thinking about the idea itself, which is actually the critique that gets levied against the social justice warrior, 20-year-olds most of the time. So Jordan Peterson, on the other hand, why is he not here? That's a great question. I can't speak for, I will not speculate about why, but the thing is we tried to get him here. And that this whole thing really came about because we invited Douglas Lane to come and give a talk here in lieu of the debate that didn't happen because Peterson canceled on Lane, and then went on the Joe Rogan podcast and said Marxists won't debate him or engage in dialogue. That was 2 weeks later, right? Then on Reddit, someone asked why he did that, and his response was that Peterson's not popular enough. That does not respond to the question. And so then we said, well, okay, so we're going to do this as a conference. Let lots of people who want to have a voice and want to have an opportunity to actually respond. Because if you're like me, you know a few Peterson fans, they're well-meaning people, and you want to respond to them, but you don't want to waste your time talking forever just to one person. Might as well make it something that's written down, might come out in a book, might go up on YouTube, etc. Make it a one-time thing, and then you're done, right? So we were organizing this, and then a lot of people, whenever they heard about this online, their whole thing was always like, oh, well, you should invite Peterson to this. And it's like, well, the whole reason we're doing this is because Peterson's not, okay, but fine. Let's invite him still. Let's just send him another invite. But then we said, okay, he already said Lane's not popular enough. We need someone who's popular. So that's why we reached out to Richard Wolff and said, hey, would you be willing to debate Jordan Peterson if he was able to make it, and if he can't make it, beg. Wolff agreed to do that at cost. Peterson then, when we reached out and very respectfully forwarded this debate proposal, said, it was his agent, but said not for less than $50,000. So, you can't speak for the guy, but when Brent Cooper sent something their way, he decided to tone police it on his Twitter and say that was the debate. The debate has already happened, right? But he will respond to Brent Cooper, but not the official emails that have come from us. I find that really interesting. And once again, can't speculate because there's this whole buffer between him and his agent or whatever, but I think it's interesting, to say the least.
Is that Peterson now?
No, I'm Dr. Crowley. Sorry, I'm talking. Okay. Okay, where were we before that happened? So that was a good question. Does anyone else have any other questions before we say the thing about NSP and then welcome the speakers? Okay, I want to get to this thing because it's 7 minutes ago. All right. I mean, everything today is going to be 7 minutes ago. That's all right. But bureaucracy, probably schedule, NSP. So NSP is the New Civilization Project at Boise State. The New Civilization Project is there's no trademark. It's more of an idea. The idea is that we are part of a multi-generational effort to re-symbolize the relations between humans and Earth. And that there are all sorts of reasons that we need to do that, but primarily because capitalist, realist, and reactionary solutions they fundamentally have no future, right? And so we have to think, what does that mean? Does that mean that the left has the solutions? Some people will say yes, some people will say that's just a conversation that's happening. Then there's going to be other people who don't identify with the left but still think that reactionaries and capitalist realists don't have a future. And I'm interested in what they have to say too. NSP doesn't have a party line. NSP is just a critical theory club at this point. And there's more information about who we are and what capitalists, realists, and reactionaries and symbolizations are in our About section on our website, which is new-symbolization.org. And that's where you to find out all of the information for the schedule today, as well as for the rest of this thing. And then you can sign up there for the newsletter. And so if there's like a last minute email that has to go out to everybody, and That's how to be on it. Now, if you register for this, if you have a name tag for this, you should already be on that list. If you got an email already, you're already on that list. If not, go there, sign up. I think that basically covers it. So, New Civilization Project, yeah. We're not reactionaries, we're not or we're trying not to be reactionaries, we're trying not to be capitalist realists, and we are concerned that Peterson might be a bit of both. So, without further ado, I'd like to welcome Michael Brooks and Antonio Garcia to the panel. And so the way we're going to do this is we're just going to sit here. Antonio's like put himself like way up here, power, like asymmetry.
Chair is my rider contract.
That'd be more comfortable. If you want a more comfortable chair,
That actually would be more comfortable.
Alton, can you grab the one that's to your right? Don't worry, it's coming your way.
Thank you.
So I'm going to be off this side. This is a pretty loose form debate. It's going to start with opening statements from them both. Antonio's going to lead it off, saying why he wanted to do this, why he thinks it matters, for setting the tone of this whole conversation. And then, it's too high. Can it go lower?
I really hope this isn't on.
It's on YouTube.
Oh,
It's-
man.
I know. You're always already set up in your videos.
Launch you out.
We'll launch.
Yeah, it will, sit on it now, see.
Yeah, this is funky.
It's funny. So you want to use that one or that one? We didn't think. Yeah, that one looks better.
Yeah, I think this.
I think the back of it's
All right.
risky, but it should be
All right.
fine.
This is gonna be this. You can get started.
Okay.
Fine.
So, and then the one big thing, and this is important, on the NSP Facebook page, in the event that we are in right now, sort of the title debate or whatever, if you go in there, it actually questions in this thread. That means you in the audience, if you have questions for them, comment in that thread, and then as moderator, I'll be able to feed that to them once we get to the Q&A part, right? And it's just a kind of expedient sorting thing, mechanism, me doing that. Welcome.
Thank you. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I guess I'll go ahead and kick it off. I'm just gonna talk, I guess, briefly how I got into this, and that way we can get kind of the Q&A, which I always find more exciting when people throw out questions. So I, probably for about 2 years, been watching Peterson with a lot of fascination because I really don't understand it. It boggles me. For those of you who don't know, I'm the executive director of the GJEC Institute and also the GJEC conference. So I have a good rapport and relationship with Zizek, which is one of the most well-known philosophers. I don't say that to toot my horn or boast. I use it as an example. So it's interesting to me that Peterson has kind of risen to popularity so quickly over things that I'm not sure were very well parsed out. But they were very emotionally appealing to people, really grabbed them. So when you want to appeal to people, you do the most individualized thing, like fuck with their pronouns. Something about them, right? Like if you're trans and you're like, I'd like to be referred to as she, and you're like, no, fuck that, you're a guy. Okay? So that's just pretty much being blatantly disrespectful and pretty much being an asshole. So you have to parse that out with what are the legal ramifications with that, which is where Bill C-16 kind of kicked off a lot. Now, this is the interesting part. And one of the things, too, that's very important about Peterson is the contextualization that Peterson is a Canadian, and a lot of his reference is within Canadian legal jurisdiction. So when we try and transfer that over to the U.S., it becomes a little bit problematic because the U.S. does not have the same hate speech laws and, I guess, legal parameters that Canada has set up. So in his original thing, when C-16 was kind of being proposed, he said, I'm worried that this will be a criminal sanction, that I will go to jail because of this. And they said, no, 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 we're going to treat it like a civil infraction. Well, that's actually, there is a criminal part to that, which is if you refuse whatever it is, you get contempt. If you refuse that, then that's where the criminal part comes in. So as far as the law part, it's a little bit more as far as procedure, whether you're in civil procedure or criminal procedure. So you could do an entire conference just on Bill C-16, but I don't want to spend too much time on that. So even before this conference, I just kind of been very deep into looking at Peterson, looking at maps of meaning, 12 rules of life, trying to get an idea of why people are so drawn to him. So YouTube was also one of the best things, looking at like Michael's show, Douglas Lane, a lot of different people across the board. And to give you an idea of the people that I draw from, and I have a very weird spectrum because my primary research is in Zizek studies. My secondary hobby, academic interest is Ayn Rand, who I think somebody mentioned earlier. So you have very much two very different people. It's not like, oh, they're kind of the same. So I watch Ben Shapiro, I watch Milo, anything and everything, because I take the Rage Against the Machine approach. You have to know your enemy. So in order to do that, you got to hear all the shit they're saying and then parse out what's not. So with Peterson, and I think kind of what we're getting to here is looking at like the longevity, why do we care about him? I think some of the things are, for example, him being considered fascist, alt-right, and so forth, need a lot more parsing out, need a lot more definition. You can't just, in my opinion, throw out buzzwords. And this, I think, is probably the most vulnerable and weak part of the left, is to just spout out a chain of, it's cis-normative patriarchy, type of blah, 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 blah. The problem with that is all the people that you want to listen to you have nullified those particular terms in some type of operational definition. I know, we'll continue Q&A. So there's a lot of those things that Peterson will trap you and he will pounce on you if you're not ready. And some of this we had talked about in the pregame. That rhetorical part I've been watching because that's also a very interesting piece. A lot of people refer to him as kind of having this smug look. He wears pinstripe suits, as my friend Tweety referred to him as a Torontoian, almost like a zoot suit riot is gonna break out. But the thing is, when you watch Peterson, he is calm, collected, and he is also focused to destroy. Whether you like it or not, if this was a sports team you were managing, that's a player you would want on your team. Whether you like the player or not is not the issue. It's their talent and what they're going to, I guess, achieve for your end, which also, I'm gonna kind of stop there. That's just kind of my initial thoughts here when I we open it up for Q&A. So I'll go ahead and turn to Michael.
It was really hard to not make a cider joke when you talked about a player on our team. If I was a general manager, I would like a guy who has some cider. It's interesting. I mean, I actually don't know in some ways how much we're going to disagree. I do think that Jordan Peterson has been able to score a lot of points, and this whole broader sort of, we call it the anti-SJW cottage industry, off of focusing on sort of linguistic and verbal modes that most people don't understand or find alienating. Random examples that are limited to college campuses and very, very narrow social, they sort of blow up into national or imagined national crises. They get a lot of mileage out of that. I think that there is clearly a continuum there. Jordan Peterson, Gabe Rubin, through to the, alt-right, however we're parsing it. I do think Jordan is definitely a reactionary, and I would use that word very specifically. I don't know, a lot of this other terminology, how are we going to define it? What are the terms we're using? I think it's definitely defensible to call him misogynist, as an example. I think it's defensible to call him any number of things, but I think what's really clear and what I would want to actually establish is he is reactive to a variety of things. He's reactive to changing, he's reactive to changing gender dynamics, active to what he perceives to be, and I think kind of very conspiratorially, this, neo-Marxist, postmodern, blah, blah, blah. Two other things just to note. I think, yes, he's had an effective time in certain interviews and certain debates when either an interviewer assigns him something that he has not said precisely, gets a lot of mileage out of that, or when they just sort of, actually, I mean, basically it's all in that continuum. When they're saying that he has said something that he has not exactly said. That was the infamous Sky News interview that went around. That was a disaster. Conversely, the Australian comedian, I think his name is Jim Jeffries, have you guys seen this clip? Jim Jeffries said, well, you know, what about this couple that wanted a cake? Is that okay? And he said, well, you shouldn't. And he said, well, what about if they didn't? So to me, him specific statements he hasn't made. But if you corner him on 5th grade level civic history of civil rights in the United States, where a guy who's built a whole brand as a political wise man, he backs down, which is a very messy room intellectually and highly irresponsible. When we did a video on it, and it's interesting because I think part of the approach that I'll cop to taking with Michael Brooks' show Majority Report, and it's interesting with his followers, they actually get very triggered and very snowflakey and all the other adjectives you can use when you joke about their father figures, or you do satire, or you take on their ideas. One of the responses to that video, which we did on the civil rights comment, was it flipped. It was like, well, now you guys are assholes because he is being humble and decent and admitting where he's wrong. And it's like, oh, but there's no metric for accountability for this person, right? So I think we're in a bit of a bind where clearly some people go out ahead of themselves and they say, and I would say defensively, they assert that he has certain attitudes, certain political inclinations, and assign things to him that he has not said precisely, which is definitely, he uses that word quite a bit. It's a very revealing word. On the other hand, he is reactive. He is reactionary we could say that quite objectively, in terms of his project, his main concerns, and his preoccupations. And then when he roams into politics in any way that doesn't have to do with sort of elevating a campus controversy, he sort of glides into disasters like the civil rights thing. So it seems to me that that kind of cool, calm, collected approach that is historically based, that is policy based, could reveal a tremendous amount of holes, and maybe he can, you know, stick to the self-help stuff, or maybe he's got some benefits for some people.
So, I guess, how long are we gonna go back and forth before we do Q&A?
I don't know. I have no idea.
Okay.
And we're gonna do a few exchanges and do Q&A, but yeah.
Dave, how much time do we have, or what do we shoot for in the Q&A?
Let's go back and forth like at least twice.
Okay, so I'm gonna respond to a couple things that Michael brought up. So one, kind of Peterson being a political figure versus, I would say, more on the social psychology. He is.
I will not sit there.
Okay. So, US, and also that crosses some of the issues relating to legal in a lot of times where it seems very ahistorical in understanding that that falls under, in the US, we have specific legal exemptions for. So I'll give you an example. If you were to have a baby and you were a snake handler cult and you put the baby in the snake pit and the baby gets killed by the poisonous snakes, you will not be held criminally liable because it is under a religious exemption. I know that sounds crazy, but in the same way with the Baker case, that was part of what they were saying, was that this falls under religious exemption. Religion does fall under civil rights, but in law, it's also. So I would say something where we're talking about denying a gay couple, baking a cake, is going to have a different legal realm than if it was a black couple and so forth. So again, a lot of these particularities, and kind of, if you remember the monk debate, I don't know why this stuck, But Dyson makes some type of thing saying, you know, we could get specific, and Peterson goes, yes, let's get specific. Or maybe I have that backwards. But if anybody saw the monk debate, you'll remember that little part. So that's the one issue. The other thing I was going to say, the metric of accountability is not only problematic for Peterson, but anyone across the board, essentially in academia. How do you hold them accountable if they're spouting out bullshit or whatever? So we have peer review, but the problem is peer review, we know, is biased. Even in the past month, I think somebody had written in the Chronicle of Higher Ed how we should abolish peer review. So the metric of accountability, the only thing I came up with that seemed reasonable was to actually put Peterson on trial in a similar way that they did Socrates in Athens. To actually bring Peterson and have a whole kind of mock trial set up so that the culpability or whatever doesn't fall necessarily on one person, but it is an entire process to say this.
A lot of religious exemption for giving him hemlock.
Was that? We'll sneak that in later. We'll say not guilty, here's your drink, and then, I don't even know if he drinks actually, with the whole.
To give it some type of meat broth or something.
Yeah.
You can't do cider and drink.
Yeah, he's got, I don't know anything about that diet or whatever that he's on, so I don't know anything. So, but that last part with the metric of accountability, and also, one last thing I'm gonna turn back over to Michael, going back to the monk debate, there was an interesting part where Peterson brought up, well, how do I calculate my privilege? Let's say that white privilege exists. How do I calculate a particular white privilege tax that you can then put on me? How do you do that? And then that also mirrors something that I was talking with a friend when we talk about, well, there's more opportunities for white, cis men, et cetera, than this other person. Now, as Peterson haunts me, and I know somebody was talking about hauntology earlier, but how do we calculate something with opportunity? So even in this room, let's say everybody had same equal opportunity. The issue is personality, and remember, this is gonna be Peterson's area, is going to differentiate whether you actually take those opportunities or deny those opportunities. So there is an individual element that he can utilize in that respect, which is in contrast to the more leftist liberal kind of group dynamic of how we understand kind of opportunities, groups, identity politics as a whole. So I'll stop there and turn it back over to Michael.
I just want to touch first, I mean, there's two kind of specific areas that I guess I would dispute out of the gate. And so I agree with you if you read Zizek is not gonna set up a consulting shop in DC and cut ads for candidates in the Midwest, or even develop some type of direct action strategy. But he knows what he's talking about, right? Like when he writes a piece on Eurozone politics, he's not getting literally basic facts of what parties he's talking about wrong. So I think that there is a distinction between saying, I mean, we're saying, I guess you're using the phrase political strategist, which is a little bit amorphous for me, but it's like knowing the most basic elements of a huge area that you're going to intervene in. I would say you do have some responsibility, and there is a distinction there. I agree. I mean, yeah, Zizek isn't operational. Zizek might gloss over a lot of subtleties, but he is a well-read and thoughtful guy in the domains he's touching on. And Jordan Peterson, to make a miscalculation like that on civil rights law is mind-blowing. Now, not to get into that rabbit hole, there definitely have been cases, including a recent case I was reading about, and I don't have it, I wish I knew you were going to bring the example of people actually definitely being prosecuted in child negligence cases, even if they have a religious exemption case. And so that law is very disputed, and the Baker case definitely does have implications for civil rights more broadly, and that's why it actually was so hotly contested, at least for somebody who has politics, like me, frankly, where I'm not waiting on the whole world to be redeemed or woke. Some people are going to be assholes. But the reason the Baker, you're not doing that, it's too bad that they're not nice people, but that has real legal implications and real potential broader fallout for civil rights case law in an era when we already have, gutted the Voting Rights Act and so on and so forth. So that's the type of thing that triggers me that Jordan Peterson doesn't know about now, or conflates Canada with, for that matter. So, you know, he's not the most important intellectual in Canada, according to the New York Times. It's in the Western world. And that means you're
Which I
gonna-
would also disagree with.
Yeah, I don't, right, sure.
Are we gonna do that?
Must be.
I think like, let's all like, mics like out just a little bit, yeah,
Yo,
Is that,
Can you
are we good?
a little bit out, a little further. away.
Better?
Yeah.
Okay.
how's
Since
about
we're
this?
both doing it at the same time, I think it gets weird.
Okay.
So those are 2 points that I think we need to be precise about. Second, third, you know, look, there's also a funny tension here of, I deal with Sam Harris a lot in this book I'm writing, and I really don't. I'm not gonna get into that, but the point is that when you're dealing with Sam Harris, you're dealing with a specific, relentless, very, very, very narrow, idealized way of thinking. Really, I mean, literally, he believes in sort of, for a self-proclaimed materialist, he is almost a pure idealist. And whether you're dealing with how he writes about foreign policy, or race, or Buddhism, there's a lane of thinking. Now, Peterson, and part of what makes him a little bit more interesting, but also what makes him ludicrous, is I saw that month debate, get precise with me about exactly how I'm privileged. In the same week that he tells the New York Times, witches are real. Like, what? You need an absolute, precise mathematical definition of something that is, yes, you can correlate with a lot of data on race and gender and so on, of course, but also is, you know, not math, not purely in a positivist, objective realm. Does overlap with subjective experience, does also overlap with cultural narratives. And, you know, if we bring in actually, I think, a guy who covers some similar terrain to Jordan Peterson and does not have great politics, but is a hell of a lot more interesting and intelligent. I think, I wish a guy named Ken Wilber was having the moment that Jordan Peterson's having now. He's this interesting independent philosopher in Colorado. He talks about quadrants, and on the right side of the quadrant are objective systems, and the left side are subjective systems, and then individual and cultural. And he does a pretty good job of sort of showing that most intellectual systems sort of fall roughly within inside one of these categories in terms of their main point of emphasis. And his argument is to be a meshwork and an integration. But Peterson does find integrating the most wildly subjective realms of speculation of Jungian psychology is synthesized with the reading of biology that naturalizes the Bible and mythology and positivism, which is really my read of what he's actually trying to do. He's saying simultaneously, I'm a positivist, empiricist in the most rigorous mode, in a way that will sort of narrowly and litigiously delegitimize any mode of sort of intellectual work that doesn't deal in those terms. But then conversely, you know, we need to take fairy tales seriously, which it wouldn't be absurd if we acknowledged the contradiction there and the synthesis he's attempting more. The last point that I would make is I do think that we need some actual marks to deal with this stuff, because I do think that some of it is that there's a dual front of saying, like, one of the reasons I like the Jeffries exchange, it's like, look, don't worry about, I'm not going to get into a tussle with you about all the stuff on college campuses that triggers you and how much of a meltdown you have about particular verbiage or not verbiage or whatever. Let's talk about something real, something historical, with regards to racism and specific political intervention, which is where these things are taking place, and what really actually, you know, matters in an operational, actual sense, whether we're talking about voting rights, policing, civil rights, so on. I'm going to apply this to all these areas. Let's get real about history and policy. And then conversely, a broader conversation about productivity and alienation is not just a conversation about identity categories. I'm using enlightenment in the positive sense, that people should have, all humans should have space to exercise themselves in their lives, including the economic one. That's kind of the really liberatory. Final point really quickly, and maybe we'll touch on this more later. I also think, and this is not in response to anything you've said, Jordan Peterson also really falls short, I think, in terms of his potential durability and the fact that while he is a reactionary, he's not a real conservative in some respects, which is that if he was so as serious as he was in politics, concerns about social, you have to have some type of critique of capitalism. And whether he went and read somebody like Schumacher in the 1970s, who was not conservative, but very focused on scale and bigness and how institutions, public and private, disrupt communities, or even just sort of writers in the sort of like small c conservative kind of Catholic tradition in the UK, which is, to be clear, is definitely not my politics, but you would have to have some intervention on the market. So he does this weird mix of writes about alienation, sort of diagnoses some problems that overlap with where we're at culturally and economically, and then his answer is a self-help guide for accommodating yourself to the marketplace, which is not satisfactory.
All right, and so we'll give Antonio a shot to respond, and then turn it over to questions, which we currently only have one. It doesn't make any sense, so. Oh, the comment. Yeah, so you go on Facebook, you go to the event for this. There's an event for this on Facebook. It's, sort of NSP has a post that says questions in this thread.
Okay.
So you just comment in there.
People are having trouble getting onto Facebook. So,
On to Facebook at all?
yeah.
There's a lot of connectivity issues in this room. I recommend going on BSU's Wi-Fi.
No, it's not easy to get on BSU's Wi-Fi.
Can we just,
Okay,
like, raise
we'll
our hand?
just, yeah, what we'll do is we'll take this microphone and we'll like, y'all get to share a microphone. We'll just do that.
Or do you want to give me the lapel and you can take this one, make it a little easier?
That is easier, except that you just kind of have to hold it up or
Sure.
something. Yeah, okay, cool. But you get to respond first and then we'll make that change.
I'm
Yeah.
keeping my mic. Not your dignity.
Just kidding.
Stop. I know we seem to be there's a lot that we're going through, and we're both trying to crush a lot of different things within a very small amount of time. But one of the things I think also to parse out, which I think is kind of a common theme of what Michael and I are doing, whether it's on different scopes or whatever, is, for example, understanding Peterson as the academic and peer-reviewed university, and then Peterson as the popular media kind of pundit person, whatever. So we were talking about this last night as we were covering conspiracy theories, and the problem is we used to have entertainment, right? But now our entertainment has basically become the media, and I would say that's also why the rise in like YouTubers like Michael and stuff with the podcast have been so successful is because they can control their content versus basically just kind of almost like a masturbatory, like, I hope you laugh, like type of thing. So, and I know someone mentioned, I can't remember, was it we used to look to comedians to lens for our news, and now it's basically been flip-flopped. So this is something I remember Peterson talking about on Joe Rogan's show, which in the past year, he's been, he's been on Joe Rogan's show, I think like 4 or 5 times this past year, so a pretty good amount. But I remember I think it was the last one I watched, it was a good point brought up because Peterson's popularity is getting, not just popularity, but we're talking about $50,000 on Patreon. He's selling out what would be basically rock star concerts at these huge venues. He's got Dave Rubin opening for him. He's now kind of all over. He's actually, I've been seeing that now worldwide, there's little Peterson groups popping up on Facebook. So something he is saying is gravitating to a wide number of people. And it is kind of a phenomenological type thing to examine. But going back to what I wanted to say, the one thing that he is scared of, and then I know that Zizek has also mentioned, is you get to a point where you lose yourself and now become a parody of yourself because you've had to keep pushing the envelope in order to keep the audiences entertained. So this was kind of, we were talking about last night, and Twitty, who wasn't able to be here, talks about Trump fatigue. y'all remember when we all saw Trump and the 8 million dumb tweets he would do? But now it's like you wake up and you're like, yeah, more dumb shit than the president, whatever, move on. Like you become desensitized. So what happens is you gotta go next level with shit. So I imagine Trump is gonna be rolling out next level stuff as we approach primaries and whatnot. So Peterson, I think, also has that same kind of anxiety and doesn't know how to control it. And you said something that kind of made mention of the idea of a vulnerability or his kind of weakness. I think this will be it, where, he almost becomes the ass clown in the room and doesn't realize it. Because he's trying to go so absurd and ridiculous to keep the audience that he's essentially lost control at that point. And if you go back to Joe Rogan, I believe, like I said, I think it was the 4th or 5th time, you'll hear him talking about this. And it was very honest and very interesting, but also kind of points to, will there be kind of an end time or a limit with Peterson to where people are kind of like, I'm ready to move on to something else. He had his kind of moment and whatnot. Like, I don't know how old everybody is, but if you remember, if you know the name Susan Summers, raise your hand. Or if you know what Stop the Insanity means, from a bald-headed lady that's not Sinead. All right? Old references, they're from the 80s, that now you'd be like, I don't know what you're talking about. So Peterson, I think, will become kind of one of those where it's like, yeah, I remember that guy, he had a couple of good thoughts, but the problem is he didn't keep his program together, and now it just kind of crumbled. And then one thing before we get to the Q&A, to make sure that we kind of top on, because Michael brought it up, the issue of Marxism and also his understanding of postmodernism. So one of the things that I noticed he quotes over and over, Jung, obviously, he comes from that kind of background. The other part is he always talks about, he loves Nietzsche, and the other part is Dostoevsky. And Dostoevsky, I don't see a lot of people taking up that particular thing, really looking at it. Now, getting back to, I think, maybe David said it earlier, mentioning Ayn Rand, these people, minus Jung, but Nietzsche and Dostoevsky are going to line up very much kind of in that Ayn Randian sense. So, in that idea, like, do we have an actual rational, like, individual, or are all people basically irrational, and they're doomed? So that's what Freud said. We have the Frankfurt School, for example, kind of in that same, like, humanity's half complete. So, the thing I think that when he reads these, quote, postmodern, and I think that term is even very complicated and can be debated all in itself, but I think he has almost snippets, and he might have read something at one time, he might have read several chapters of Derrida and so forth, but I think kind of like Michael said earlier, and he's right, that these little kind of snippets, he tries to almost suture together in a cool looking quilt, and then put it on people like, don't you feel cozy? Just don't look at the shit here, just feel cozy. And so again, that appeals not to the logic and reasoning, but to the emotional side of people, which is humanity's fundamental flaw, is the emotional. So if you're in the courtroom, you can have all the evidence and facts, doesn't matter. If you have a trial, you have a jury in front of you, as long as you can emotionally get that jury on your side, you can win the case. And it'll be the most outlandish shit, you'll be like, what? But you can understand that emotional feel. And the same thing happens vice versa. Like, it wasn't too long ago, the Casey Anthony case. Y'all remember that? The girl that they didn't know she'd killed her kid and so forth. Everybody thought they were a legal expert and that they knew what that case was. And then Casey Anthony was found not guilty or acquitted, I can't remember the exact. But she's now, I think, doing porn or something in Florida, I can't remember. But, yeah, she's wild. You get a chance, and this is a side note. But when you watch these cases, legal cases are very interesting because cultural due process and legal due process are not on the same page. So once we hear something, we automatically judge it. We say, yeah, this guy's guilty, or no, this person's innocent. But legal due process, you have to go through it. You can't just make sweeping allegations and then just go, okay, that must be true. So I think there's a lot of pitfalls. And again, going back to what Michael said, the vulnerability issue of understanding how long Peterson will last as being relative is, I think, important to take up, and also to look at what is he not controlling in that trajectory. And as each part kind of falls off and he becomes more kind of a parody, and more kind of, I'm cracking jokes, I'm hitting him with Dave Rubin, I've got cool suits. He's losing his original message and position of why he even started being an academic or doing what he was doing in the first place. And all of us risk that, especially in academia and kind of with understanding Marx, when we have the possibility to earn a little extra scratch, oh, we'll jump on it. So I'll stop there.
I think that makes a lot of sense. To me, my only real sort of final points for this are the conditions that give rise to him are more important than he is. And I don't mean that in a dismissive way. I kind of think that's basically true to everybody, every phenomenon. And then the other thing about staying power is interesting to me because I mean, is he going to always get profiled by the New York Times? Is he always going to be sort of in the center of a certain type of cultural conversation? No, but like almost nothing is. And in today's environment, you have fewer and fewer, whether it's cultural products or political products or intellectual products that are truly mass culture. Things are much more bifurcated and specialized. Like, I think NFL, Beyonce, I mean, the examples of things that like everybody's on is decreasing significantly. And I just saw a poll the other day that Beyonce is politically divisive, which that is, there is a stat for race, her politically divisive, you're a racist. or don't represent Jay-Z or something, but so I think, is he gonna be at the center? No, but will he always have a lane and a brand? Absolutely, as long as the conditions are in place that he's speaking to.
All right. Can I ask you something? So, real quick, and then, because he said that, it reminded me, and like I said, we were gonna talk about the whole food thing. If he becomes irrelevant in the academic world, I could totally see him hooking up with Food Network and doing this whole Keynote like, rollout. Because his daughter does that whole blog with
He can sell steroids, for Alex Jones. It's perfect.
Yeah.
He'll just join Milo and like sell.
Guys, can we just, Alex Jones is a lot more talented than anything. I loathe the dude, but let's have some respect here. Alex Jones is in a class of his own as far as broadcasting capacity.
Okay, so I want to question this like bifurcation between like, if you're looking at social analysis, on the one hand you have this sort of like literary subjective side, and then on the other hand you have like positivist or like empirical quantification. I don't think that's a binary. I think that there's a third option, right? And this is how I read Lacan. This is how I read like Lacanian discourse analysis. I think that like, and for me also as like in general a follower of Badiou, I think that you can connect an understanding, and like Lacan did this specifically. I think you can connect an understanding of ways of communicating and the forms of discourse that are like more or less oppressive in one or another way. Like when you talk about the concept of surplus jouissance, right? That like I think you can analyze them mathematically. I don't think there's a problem with that.
Marx did.
Right. Well, yeah, that's the value form, right? Yeah, exactly. Talks about like surplus jouissance and that kind of thing. That's directly from surplus value. I think that I think part of what's cool about set theory and like Lacan's use and Badiou's use of set theory is it's not just like, oh, this is a theory of being. It's also this is the theory of the foundations of discourse, and like analytic theory sort of rejects that. But I feel like then there's this key link of like, oh, what about libido? What about like relations of excitation, production, labor, that kind of thing that you can connect that back to. I guess what's interesting to me and like generally how I like to approach oppression and like privilege and things like that is talk about like how is your discourse structured? How is your discourse structured in relation to surplus value, in relation to surplus jouissance, that kind of thing. And I think that you can basically quantify it. The problem is just getting people onto the territory of even being able to discuss or understand it. Like a lot of people just don't even want to hear about Lacan. A lot of people don't want to talk about it, or are like, oh, this is like quackery. This is like fake. This is not relevant. But I think you can make a point that it's more or less scientific. And like this is like where I agree with Louis Althusser. And I think that I would very much support, and I know a lot of us here are influenced by Lacan, I would very much support sort of being more like unashamed about that and like throwing out this stuff about, well, wait, discourse analysis, the Kantian discourse analysis is fucking precise. It can like really, you can use this to like talk very specifically about what privilege is, about what oppression is, about what all these things are. And like, personally, I'd like to see more of that, way more of that, like the logic of the signifier, that kind of thing, to challenge people, because it's like it's not just like, you know, description. It's like actual analysis.
We're gonna go up here, if one of you wants to respond to that. And by the way, we've got a, oh jeez. I'm so glad I didn't make that noise again. All right, we're gonna take one more question right here, and then we've got a whole bunch on the Facebook. Maybe the two of you are able to review that. If not, I'll do it. But we're just gonna take put a few questions out there, let you each make a closing comment, and then we'll go to lunch, which the goal is to go to lunch at 15.
Okay, so first thing was, I was just really struck, Antonio, your opening remarks. You said that Peterson was going to call the collective. That seems like the opposite of true. That it seems like oftentimes Peterson is actually performatively very emotional and even unstable. That's part of the appeal. It's almost like this revival church thing where you're watching him, you know, being slain by the Spirit or something, you know, seeing him weep about the decline of the individual. But just really quickly, I also did need to say, with regard to what the previous question was about and your comment about Peterson challenging people to quantify exactly how privileged he is, it almost seems like all this sort of highfalutin stuff about what's subjective and what's objective and all of that stuff is almost beside the point. Like even if you're a total positivist and you suspect Lacan of being a charlatan and all that stuff, it still seems to be the case that what's wrong with what Peterson is saying there is just that it's a total straw man of what people are saying. There are lots of things that are objectively real that aren't quantifiable, and why shouldn't we think of it like you can't for the Sorites paradox, right? Exactly how many stones make a pile, but that doesn't mean that objective reality doesn't consist of stones and piles.
Right.
And so I was wondering if I was missing something about where you were going with that example.
Can y'all hear me? With
No.
okay.
You have to
You
hold
gotta
the
put all
lapel
it
up.
up.
I was gonna try and actually put on the lapel. So, I would say in response to the first thing, which interestingly, that whole kind of almost evangelical messianic spirit is part of what I think I was kind of getting to may be the downfall. When you start trying to cross over to be bigger than yourself. So almost, kind of mentioning Lacan talks about, I see in you more than you. And the problem is if you're looking at a mirror and I see in myself more than myself, you could run into egotistical problems that are driven more out of egotistical desire than an actual grounding of understanding real grounded relations, real things that are happening across the board. I think when I say Peterson comes across as calm and collective and directed, he may be animated, but we should not mistake being animated for necessarily emotionally off. Now, I would say there are times where he does kind of get, I think, riled up. I'm trying to remember, he got mad at something and he said, yeah, I guess I was a little probably irritated, but he didn't like whatever the person said. And that's gonna happen to any person because they're emotional. I actually almost feel better that he has that emotion than not having any emotion, because that means at least he has the susceptibility to connect and understand at an intersubjective level, despite any discourse or overarching kind of, there's only this kind of finite world.
Yeah, I actually think as far as his appeal outside of academia, his emotions are majorly to his advantage. And I think what you were talking about with when he's cool and collected is there are certain types of interview formats where he's dealing with a hostile interviewer and he's well briefed and he knows how to deal with them. If they are, as I say, saying things that he has not said precisely. I heard another interview with him, a radio interview on the BBC, where I wish I could remember the specific formulation, but the guy was like, asking him about gender, and he said, well, why is why is chaos the word used to signify that, when obviously you don't have great things, you know, you don't have good feelings about chaos? And he's like, oh, well, gender could also be, you know, femininity could also be creativity, it could also be this, it could also be that. He did his move. And then the interviewer just simply said, right, but that isn't the word you chose, so why? And he had nothing. He really had nothing when he was, so you do have to be precise in those settings. I think more broadly though, I think his emotions are very appealing to people. And I think, and that is where, look, I mean, I just want to I think two basic points on this. One, you could say maybe the kind of obvious point in this room, but it's a point that should be registered, that of course, you know, there's no doubt that he gets to be literally hysterical because of, you know, because he's a white guy, that's true. Other people from other backgrounds wouldn't be able to pull that and move off. And then I think the question with all of this, as I say, is what's giving rise to him? And then the second question is, what are the legitimate things that we could potentially deal with? Like alienation, like lack of purpose, like real actual things that he is pointing to in his own way that we gotta deal with. And then the other part, if you know, the other stuff that's just cultural backlash, then we just gotta win, you know, and defeat that politics. That's to me the balance.
Okay, we're gonna go right here. I'll try to keep this short. One of the things that I constantly see in Jordan Peterson is an appeal to the idea of community. I think, you know, it's been commonly asserted by people on the left, this idea that, you know, modernity, the alienation of modernity provokes this feeling that there is no community, and this is something that I think has provoked a kind of reactionary impulse. The idea that community is somehow mythic, it's something that's in the past that we need to return to. And I think that people have often overlooked that Marx and also the post-structuralists have often dealt with the question of what is community and how do we approach community. Even Jacques Derrida, as obtuse as he sometimes is, has, you know, specters of Marx with ontology and the question of looking to the future, and also the book, The Politics of Friendship. And this question of community is something that I think is not always dealt with directly by the left, either by Marxists or kind of the post-structuralist crowd now. I think Zizek is actually a little bit better at this. He, I think, deals more with the idea of community, with morality, especially in his approach to Christianity and things like that. But do you see a potential for the left to start talking and bringing up this question of community in response to this kind of mythic reactionary thing that was brought up?
No.
Let's just take a couple more and give you your closing remarks. You can kind of abstract out the thing you want to say, so.
Do we have to close out at 11:30, or can we get a few more minutes?
Yeah, you'll get a couple.
I'm being silenced. Did you see that? I just took down my free speech.
For Michael, you mentioned when you're speaking something about like Peterson's involvement in sort of like outrage culture or something on campus as being sort of unreal, or part of some, as opposed to some more real implications to his work. I was wondering if you could perhaps qualify that a bit more, because I feel like I immediately when he was opposing Bill C-16 on campus. That is actually probably one of his most like real endeavors, because he mobilized like very real people for a very real legal battle that affected like, you know, very real people. And so I was wondering, maybe I'm misunderstanding it.
Can I just touch, I'll elaborate, but I actually, what I meant is what he was doing had very real implications for real students and real people, which is why it mattered to us on the left and why he was wrong. But there is a whole culture of taking either something like that that has real implications, but also even like, I don't, you know, if you watch this content, it's like something silly happened at Oberlin. Like some students, you know, we can't have Mexican night, that's otherizing, or something at the cafeteria. Whatever, I'm sorry, I don't care about this sort of thing one way or another. They will build content out of that and give a huge amount of brand is that, you know, the left isn't dealing with real policy issues, the left isn't worried about, you know, inequality, trade, arms control, like the actual, like, it's like, no, the whole leftist project is, you know, we need to get rid of burrito night. And that's kind of what I meant. Yeah.
Then it's gonna go Robert, Jacob, and then you close it out, and we'll all go to lunch and ask more questions there.
No questions at lunch.
Well,
No.
no one's going to lunch with you.
I know. I will eat by myself. That's not what you texted me, David. You want to be all to yourself, huh?
Maybe.
Well, I asked this in the Facebook comments, but I was accused of not making sense. So I will go.
No,
ahead.
Kenneth didn't make sense. It's different comments.
Well, I'll still add, I'll elaborate a little and ask this. So obviously, we can kind of talk about how much of an impact Jordan Peterson will have in the long run. But at least environmentally, we're at the point where even the short run is scary. And, you know, the only person who I can really think of comparing Jordan Peterson to in terms of sustainability is someone like Ayn Rand, who, while maybe not having the most dramatic, profound effect on international politics, has formed a significant sect of American politics. And so what I really want to ask is, with Peterson's climate denial, setting aside his philosophical and political implications, which is somewhat impossible to do, but pretending to do so, are we going to get killed by Canadian Kermit because he refuses to acknowledge the ice caps are melting? And does that implicate how we should react to it?
I will see.
Yeah, I just wanted to supplement the question about the impact on things via the bill C-16, and to say that this has had real political implications in Ontario. Doug Ford was elected in Ontario. One of the mandates that he has put forward in Ontario is that all universities in Ontario have to put forward a policy in regards to free speech. And I think that this is very related to things that Peterson has talked about. Peterson actually thought about running for Premier of Ontario on similar sorts of grounds, which will basically outlaw any sort of protest to speakers on campus in Ontario. So I just wanted to say that this has had real political Canada where Peterson is working. It is important, even if it seems like almost a marginal thing. His response to Bill C-18, it's had real significant political implications that are going to affect how universities function in Ontario, at least.
Thank you. Close out. Use a real mic.
Want to go first?
What's the last word?
I'll assert my dominance. I just briefly on the climate question, I think, you know, of course it's ridiculous. He put out a video for PragerU, it was trash, it was ridiculous, it was expected because he is a right-wing pundit. I mean, again, these are things we have to be, you know, I'll be precise, and then we also at a certain point have to get real. And especially with a video like that, that's just basic right-wing hackery. But I think that more broadly, and this is where we need a materialist perspective, like the issue with climate change is not, I know a certain mindset gets obsessed with people not accepting the science and so on, and that's a problem. But the real problem is literally the structural power of the fossil fuel industry and how we design our economy. And if you don't deal with that power dynamic, you know, it doesn't matter how many, like, you know, logic ohms you have with your dumb friends on social media or whatever. We're not going to deal with the climate crisis. So he's not a positive factor, obviously, but I wouldn't put the blame on him either. I think we can exempt him from the blame. With regard to Bill C-16, let me be more precise. There is an anti-SJW cottage industry. They use campus controversies. A lot of them are not like that. Some of them are definitely relatively marginal. And some of them, I'll be blunt, I mean, I am, you know, I'm the same publisher that Angela Nagel. I think there are real strategic left approaches, these sort of cultural political wars, and I think from a strategic perspective, that's something people really need to think about. But you're absolutely right with regards to C16 and Brett Weinstein, who has built his whole thing off of another, you know, campus situation with less, you know, without the legal ramifications, was on Fox News with Tucker Carlson, was testifying before a Republican Congress who are moving in precisely the directions you're talking about, which is absolutely to literally limit speech on campuses. So while I think there is a part of sort of a campus culture that people are responding to, which I think is not strategic, censorious, not well executed, and is problematic strategically, the right is going to actually do what they accuse us of doing. They are literally going to try to suppress speech and protest, and that's the strategy. And Peterson and Weinstein and them are part of it, which, again, you know, I don't think showing people's hypocrisy matters for much in today's environment, but that's where they're coming from. Number three, the community dimension is really important. I think that's another contradiction. I don't think you could diagnose all of this alienation and say you should double up on your own individual project. Scott Atran is another person who should be brought in this conversation, who does ethnographic studies on why people become terrorists and the lack of purpose and shared value frameworks, and he connects the line between the alt-right and groups like ISIS, and he's very serious about restoring community bonds. And Marx definitely speaks to that, but also a boring liberal like Robert Putnam speaks to that, like Bowling Alone, 1997. People don't have social networks. It's a major problem. Jordan Peterson identifies the symptom, but not the cause.
So I first, before I close out, just want to thank Michael for doing that, being this morning. Thank God it wasn't 8 o'clock in the morning. I'm not a good early riser, and I have back issues, so that's why if you see me fidgeting, that's the reason. But there's been a lot of great points, and a lot of great questions, and again, trying to tackle everything on an hour is almost nearly impossible. And kind of like you brought up in the Canadian context, something I saw before I got on the plane to get here was University of Regina is now setting up a process to get rid of, quote, problematic professors. And so what I see, and I haven't had time to really kind of think about it and go through it if Peterson is a part of this, but if y'all remember, this would have been maybe like 15 years ago with Horowitz.
Oh, yeah.
David Horowitz's
Came
whole
to my
campaign.
campus, in 2006, he came to debates.
Yeah, if you don't know about David Horowitz, he was basically witch hunting, quote, liberal professors. And so now, I almost think that there is going to be kind of the obverse happening. That now, you have instead of hunting the liberal professor, there's gonna be the ultra-conservative, right-wing professors. If they don't use your pronoun, fuck them and fire them. Well, the problem is, if you want to done somebody, I don't know how that really gets to an aha moment of a better tomorrow. I think that's one of my critiques of how the left proceeds with anything. If you just fire somebody and there's no follow-up to help them, guide them, or understand why, then there's no redemption. And that kind of, Christian aspect in the U.S. is how we love redemption, but you don't find it with the left, and that becomes problematic. So that's kind of one point. The other thing with kind of the campus groups and stuff, Milo, I believe it was Milo, made a really good point. He said, in a time where you have a culture of outrage, you should expect the level to be the most outrageous. And so it's like one group screams, the other group has to scream even more. And I don't really understand with all of the protests and things, and people get shitty with me about that, but I'm like, what do you want to accomplish? I understand symbolically, to raise an issue so more people see it. I agree. But if you think that protesting will stop a kid from getting molested, a person from getting shot, anything like that, we're fucking crazy. So that's where Peterson will capitalize on, I think, that little particular gap and leverage that against any person who allows that gap to happen, and then say, well, what if this were happening? He would start bombarding with examples. And that, we didn't have time to get to it, but the rhetorical aspect and how he approaches things, I think is very problematic in the sense that if he teaches that to subsequent other people, they will have a significantly better leverage against the left than the left will have vice versa, in a sense of understanding power and all of those dynamics. So I'll be here after. I know we're gonna cut for lunch, but if anybody wants to talk more or whatever, and I'll be here for the whole weekend, so we can always talk more. But thanks everybody for showing up, and Dave for getting all this together, so.
Yeah, thank you, everybody. Give it up for the speakers.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good job, guys.
I'll just say a couple of things. We can start turning those cameras off at this point, it doesn't matter. So live streamers, we can cut it.
All right.
I just want to say something for. What's that?
Where the cameras
As
off.
soon as the cameras are off, we can fight, like literally. we-
So now we can
I just wanted to know.
But I just want to say a couple things for the good of the order. These are necessary. So if you're here for extra credit, if you're